The bell rang at Jefferson High, signaling the end of third period, but for one classroom, the tension hadn't eased. It had only just begun. Room 214 smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old textbooks, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, especially when you were waiting for something uncomfortable to pass. At the front of the room stood a teacher with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. She'd been teaching English at this school for over 20 years. To some, she was tough but fair. To others, especially students who didn't look like her or talk like her, she was just tough. In the third row, near the window, sat a 16-year-old boy with his head slightly down, fingers tapping nervously on his notebook. He'd stayed up late the night before finishing his essay on To Kill a Mockingbird, rewriting whole paragraphs to make sure his ideas came through clearly. He wasn't the loudest in class, but he paid attention. He turned in his work on time, and today, for the first time all semester, his teacher had called on him to read his piece aloud. "Come on up," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "Let's hear what you've got." He stood slowly, heart thudding. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in front of 30 pairs of eyes. He walked to the front, paper in hand, and began to read. His voice was soft at first, but he gained confidence as he went, his words painting a picture of injustice, empathy, and growing up in a world that often judged too quickly. He'd written about how Scout Finch learned to see people for who they really were, not what others assumed. It was thoughtful, honest, the kind of work teachers usually praised, but halfway through he stumbled over a word. Prejudice. He paused, took a breath, and tried again. "That's when it happened." "Oh, for heaven's sake," the teacher cut in, her voice sharp like a ruler snapping. "If you spent less time scrolling on that phone of yours and more time actually reading proper English, maybe you wouldn't sound like you just walked off the street." The room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. The boy froze. His cheeks burned. He didn't look up, but he could feel every eye on him. The curious ones, the pitying ones, the ones trying not to laugh. His throat tightened. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to run. But he stood there, paper trembling in his hands, unsure whether to keep reading or just sit back down in shame. The teacher didn't apologize. She didn't soften her tone. Instead, she sighed like she was dealing with a hopeless case and said, "Just finish it quickly." He did, voice barely above a whisper now. When he reached the last line, he mumbled, "Thank you," turned and walked back to his seat as fast as he could without running. He kept his eyes on the floor the whole way. Once seated, he stared at his desk, blinking hard, willing himself not to cry. Not here, not in front of everyone. Around him, the class shifted uncomfortably. A few kids exchanged glances. One girl in the back bit her lip, her brow furrowed. Another boy scribbled something in his notebook, maybe to distract himself, maybe to remember. No one said anything. No one ever did. Speaking up meant drawing attention to yourself, and in this school that kind of attention rarely ended well. The teacher moved on like nothing had happened. All right, next, but something had happened. Something quiet but deep. The kind of moment that doesn't make headlines right away but sticks to your bones. For the boy, it wasn't just about being corrected, it was the way she'd said it. The way she'd tied his speech to where he lived, to how he looked, to assumptions she'd clearly made long before he ever walked into her classroom. It wasn't about his essay anymore. It was about him, his worth, his intelligence, his place in that room. Later, during lunch, he sat alone under the bleachers, picking at his sandwich. He replayed the scene in his head over and over, each time feeling smaller. He thought about skipping her class tomorrow, maybe even dropping the course, anything to avoid that look, that tone, that crushing feeling of being seen as less than. Meanwhile, across the cafeteria, another student sat with a group of friends, phone in hand. She'd been in that English class too. She'd seen the whole thing, and she'd recorded it, not to embarrass anyone, but because something about it felt wrong in a way she couldn't ignore. She'd watched the boy walk back to his seat with his shoulders hunched like he was carrying the weight of the whole room. She'd heard the teacher's words echo in the silence that followed, and she knew, just knew, that if no one said anything, it would happen again. To him, to someone else, maybe even to her. She didn't post the video right away. That night after dinner, she texted the boy. Just a simple message, "Hey, I saw what happened today. Are you okay?" He replied hours later, "I'm fine. Just tired." She sent the clip. I recorded it. I think people should see this. He didn't respond for a long time. Then, do what you think is right. She stared at her screen, heart pounding. She knew posting it could stir up trouble, for the teacher, for the school, maybe even for herself. But she also knew silence was its own kind of violence. So with a deep breath, she uploaded the video. She added a short caption. This is what racism sounds like in 2025, not always loud, not always obvious, but always hurtful. She hit post and put her phone face down on the bed. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Somewhere a dog barked. Life went on like normal. But in that moment, something shifted. Quietly, powerfully, like the first crack in a dam that had held back too much for too long. Back in room 214, the teacher graded papers, unaware. She believed she'd handled the situation correctly. Firm but necessary. After all, standards had to be maintained. She didn't see the damage in her words, didn't consider how they landed. To her, it was just another Tuesday. But for the boy under the bleachers, for the girl with the phone, for every student who'd ever been made to feel less than in that classroom, it was the day everything changed, and none of them knew it yet. But this moment, small, painful, raw, was about to ripple far beyond the walls of Jefferson High. The video didn't blow up right away. At first, it was just a few likes, friends of the girl who posted it, maybe a cousin or two. She checked her phone every few minutes after school the next day, half expecting it to disappear into the endless scroll of the internet like so many other things. But then a local activist group shared it, then a teacher from another school, then someone tagged a news reporter. By lunchtime, students were whispering in hallways, pulling out their phones to show each other the clip. Some were angry. Some were shocked. Others just nodded quietly, like they'd been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. The boy from the video kept his head down, trying to ignore the glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when he walked by. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He never had. But now, whether he liked it or not, people were seeing him. Really seeing him. At home that evening, his mom sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, eyes red. She'd seen the video. She'd watched her child stand there, voice shaking, while an adult, a teacher, someone trusted to guide and protect, cut him down with words that felt like they came from another time. She wanted to scream. She wanted to drive straight to the school. But she took a deep breath instead. She knew her son well enough to know he didn't want a scene. He wanted respect. And maybe, just maybe, a little justice. Meanwhile, the girl who posted the video was getting messages from strangers. Some supportive, some cruel. "You're ruining that teacher's life over one comment," one said. Another, "Good for you." Someone needed to speak up. She blocked the worst of them but kept reading the rest, trying to figure out if she'd done the right thing. Her hands trembled a little every time she opened her notifications. She hadn't expected this kind of attention. She'd just wanted someone to know what really happened in that classroom. By the next morning, the video had over 100,000 views. Local news stations were calling the school for comment. The district's social media pages were flooded with comments, parents demanding answers, alumni sharing their own stories, students organizing a walkout for the end of the week. The principal sent an email to staff urging caution in public statements and patience during this sensitive time. But patience was running thin. In room 214, the teacher walked in like any other day, coffee in hand, lesson plan tucked under her arm. But the air was different. Students didn't meet her eyes. The usual chatter before class started was gone. When she asked a question, no one raised their hand. She frowned but carried on, unaware that half the class had watched the video at least twice, that they'd heard her voice, sharp, dismissive, loaded with judgment, echoing in their heads long after the bell rang. At lunch, a group of students gathered near the flagpole. They weren't loud. They weren't shouting slogans. They just stood there, holding signs that read, "Respect starts with listening and words hurt too." A few teachers watched from a distance, unsure whether to intervene. The school resource officer leaned against his cruiser, arms crossed, but didn't say a word. It wasn't a protest, not really. It was more like a quiet refusal to pretend everything was fine. That afternoon, a local news van pulled up to the school. A reporter in a windbreaker stood near the front gate, microphone in hand, asking students for their thoughts. Most shook their heads and walked faster. But one girl, soft-spoken with braids and a worn backpack, stopped. It wasn't just what she said, she told the camera, voice steady. It's that no one ever said anything before. That's what hurts the most. Back at home, the boy watched the news clip on his mom's tablet. He recognized the girl. She'd sat 2 rows behind him. He'd never even spoken to her. But there she was, defending him to strangers. His chest felt tight. Not from shame this time, but from something else. Something like hope. His mom sat beside him. You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to, she said gently. But if you do, I'll be right there with you. He thought about it all night. He replayed the video. Not to relive the pain, but to remind himself he hadn't done anything wrong. His voice, his words, his presence, they mattered. And if speaking up could help someone else avoid that same feeling of being small, maybe it was worth it. The next morning, he called the local station back. He agreed to a short interview. Just a few minutes, just his voice, no face on camera if he didn't want it. When the reporter asked how it made him feel, he didn't say angry or hurt. He said, it made me feel like I didn't belong. Like my thoughts weren't worth hearing unless I sounded a certain way. He paused. But I do belong, and my voice matters. Those words spread faster than the video itself. By the end of the week, the school board announced they were opening a formal investigation. Teachers were asked not to discuss the incident with students. Parents packed the next PTA meeting, some demanding the teacher be fired on the spot, others warning against rushing to judgment. But the conversation had already moved beyond one classroom, one comment. It was about who gets hurt in school and who gets silenced. The girl who posted the video started getting messages from students at other schools. This happened to me too. My teacher said something similar. Thank you for saying something. She didn't reply to all of them, but she saved every one. She printed a few and tucked them into her journal. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She just couldn't stay quiet anymore, and the boy, he started raising his hand again. Not in that class. He'd been moved to another section, but in history, in science, even in gym when the coach asked for volunteers. Each time his voice came a little easier. Each time he remembered he had a right to be here, to speak, to be seen. Outside the school, the world kept turning. Cars passed. Birds flew. But inside those hallways, something had shifted. The silence had been broken. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to put it back together. No one knew what would happen next. The investigation could take weeks. The teacher might fight back. The school might try to sweep it under the rug. But one thing was certain. People were watching now. And they weren't going to look away. As the days passed, the story stopped being just about one classroom moment. It started pulling threads from years gone by. People who'd graduated from Jefferson High long ago began speaking up. On social media, in letters to the school board, even in quiet conversations at grocery stores and bus stops, former students shared their own memories. The time that same teacher told a student their grammar sounded like they'd never opened a book. The time she refused to let someone present a project on Black poets because it wasn't relevant. The time she called 2 students disruptive just for laughing. Together in the hallway, both of them Black, both of them quiet kids. At first, the school district tried to keep things calm. They released a short statement saying they take all concerns seriously and that a thorough review is underway. But the more stories came out, the harder it became to pretend this was just a misunderstanding. Parents showed up at the central office with folders full of notes, old report cards, even screenshots of emails. One mother brought a recording, years old, of a parent-teacher conference where the teacher suggested her son might do better in a vocational program instead of college prep classes. He'd graduated top of his class 2 years later. Meanwhile, the teacher herself gave an interview to a small local radio station. She sat in the studio with her hands folded neatly in her lap, voice steady. I've dedicated my life to education, she said. I hold all my students to the same standard. If that's being called racist now, then I don't recognize the world anymore. She insisted the comment in the video was taken out of context, that she was only trying to encourage better diction. She didn't mention the student by name. Didn't apologize. Just said she was heartbroken that her intentions were being twisted. But then something unexpected happened. A current teacher at the school, someone who'd worked alongside her for over a decade, leaked internal emails to a local journalist. In one message from 3 years earlier, the teacher had written to a colleague after a staff meeting, "It's exhausting trying to teach kids who come from neighborhoods where reading isn't valued. Some of them act like showing up is enough." In another, she complained about the constant noise from certain students, describing their voices as grating and unrefined. The journalist verified the emails with the district's IT department. Within hours, they were published online. This wasn't just about one bad day. This was a pattern, and it wasn't hidden. It had been written down, sent through school servers, saved in inboxes. The school board called an emergency meeting. Attendance was so high they had to move it to the gymnasium. Students filled the bleachers. Parents stood along the walls. Even retired teachers showed up, some in support of their former colleague, others to say they'd stayed silent too long. When the board president stood at the mic, her voice cracked slightly. "We are committed to a safe, respectful learning environment for every student," she said, "and that includes examining our own failures." Back at home, the boy watched the live stream on his phone, curled up on the couch. His mom sat beside him, knitting, a habit she picked up when she needed to keep her hands busy. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They both knew this wasn't just about getting one teacher fired. It was about whether the school would finally admit that some students had been treated differently, not because of their behavior, but because of how they looked, where they lived, or how they spoke. The next day, 3 more teachers came forward, not with accusations, but with regrets. One said she'd heard the comment in class and wanted to speak up but didn't know how. Another admitted she'd laughed it off at a staff meeting once, thinking it was just how she talks. A third said she'd reported concerns years ago, but nothing ever changed. "I thought I was the only one who noticed," she told a reporter. "Now I see I was just the only one who stayed quiet." The pressure kept building. Local civil rights groups held a peaceful vigil outside the school. Students organized a read-in, sitting in the courtyard during lunch, sharing books by authors of color, reading aloud passages about dignity and justice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was powerful. Every voice, clear and strong, seemed to say, "We are here, we belong, and we won't be erased." The teacher stopped coming to school. Officially, she was on administrative leave. Unofficially, everyone knew she wouldn't be returning to room 214. Her classroom stayed locked. Her desk sat empty. A substitute took over the class, and the first thing she did was ask the students, "What do you need to feel respected here?" They talked for the whole period. As the investigation deepened, more documents surfaced. Old discipline records showing black students were sent to the office twice as often as white students for the same infractions. Notes from meetings where concerns about bias were dismissed as overreactions. It became clear this wasn't just about one person. It was about a system that had let things slide for too long. Still, not everyone agreed. Some parents defended the teacher, saying she meant well or that kids today are too sensitive. A few even started a petition to support a dedicated educator under attack. But their voices were drowned out by the growing chorus of students, parents, and staff who said enough was enough. The boy didn't respond to every message or interview request, but he did write a letter to the school board, to the principal, to himself, really. In it, he didn't ask for punishment. He asked for change. "I don't want another student to feel like their voice isn't good enough," he wrote. "I don't want teachers to think it's okay to judge someone before they even speak. I just want to walk into a classroom and know I'm seen for who I am, not for what someone assumes." His mom read it over his shoulder and hugged him without saying a word. That night she posted it, not with his name, just his words, and it spread faster than anything yet. By the end of the week, the district announced the investigation would conclude within 10 days. The board promised transparent findings and meaningful action. No one knew exactly what that meant yet. But for the first time in a long time, people believed something real might actually happen. And in a quiet house on the south side of town, a boy who once kept his head down now sat at his desk, writing a new essay, not for school but for himself. This one was about courage, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the kind that shows up in small moments. Hitting post on a video, speaking up in a meeting, standing in a courtyard with a book in your hand. The kind that says gently but firmly, "This is not okay, and it doesn't have to stay this way." The night before the school board hearing, the boy couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional car passing on the street. His stomach felt tight like he'd swallowed a stone. He wasn't nervous about speaking, he'd done that already. What scared him was the weight of it all. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every student who'd ever been made to feel small in that classroom. Every parent who'd been told their concerns were overblown. Every teacher who'd stayed quiet because they didn't know how to speak up. He didn't want to let them down. His mom knocked softly on his door around midnight. She didn't say much, just handed him a warm mug of cocoa and sat on the edge of his bed. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said quietly. "You never did." He nodded, sipped the drink, and for the first time in days felt like he could breathe. The next morning, the school gym was packed. Not just with parents and students, but with reporters, community leaders, even a few people from neighboring towns who'd followed the story online. Folding chairs filled every inch of space. Latecomers stood along the walls or sat on the floor near the basketball hoops. The air buzzed with low conversation, the rustle of programs, the occasional baby's cry. It felt less like a school meeting and more like a moment the whole town had been waiting for, whether they realized it or not. When the board members took their seats at the long table on the stage, the room fell quiet. The president adjusted her glasses and began with a short statement about fairness, due process, and the district's commitment to equity. Then came the hard part: testimony. First, a retired teacher spoke, soft-spoken in her 70s, hands trembling slightly as she held her notes. She'd taught at Jefferson for 30 years. "I wish I'd said something sooner," she admitted, voice cracking. "I heard things, saw things, told myself it wasn't my place. But silence is a choice too, and I chose wrong." Next, a current teacher, someone who'd worked in the same hallway as the accused educator for over a decade, stepped up. She didn't name names, but her words were clear. "We've all seen it," she said. "The double standards. The assumptions. The way some kids are treated like problems before they even open their mouths. Pretending it doesn't happen doesn't make it go away. It just lets it grow." Then it was the boy's turn. He walked to the microphone slowly, heart pounding but shoulders straight. He didn't look at the crowd. He kept his eyes on the board members, on the faces that held the power to decide what happened next. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, stronger than anyone expected, maybe even himself. "I didn't do anything wrong that day," he began. "I wrote an essay. I read it out loud. And I was made to feel like I didn't belong, like my voice wasn't good enough just because of how I sounded." He paused, took a breath. "That hurt. But what hurts more is knowing it's happened before, and it'll happen again, unless something changes." He didn't shout, didn't accuse, just told the truth, plain, simple, human. When he finished, the room stayed silent for a beat too long. Then someone clapped, then another. Soon the whole gym was on its feet, not cheering exactly, but showing respect, honor, recognition. His mom watched from the third row, tears streaming down her face, but smiling through them. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. After him, his mother spoke. She didn't talk about policy or procedure. She talked about her son coming home that day with his head down, about how he stopped raising his hand in class, about how she'd lain awake wondering if she should have moved him schools years ago. "I send my child to school to learn," she said, voice firm but gentle. "Not to be told he's less than because of the way he talks or the color of his skin. That's not teaching. That's harm." More people spoke. Students, parents, even a school counselor who'd filed a report years ago that was never followed up on. Each story added another layer, another piece of proof that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a culture, and it had gone on long enough. The teacher in question didn't attend. Her lawyer sent a letter saying she was unavailable due to health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. She didn't want to face the room. Didn't want to see the faces of the people she'd hurt, or worse, the ones she'd failed to see at all. After hours of testimony, the board recessed to deliberate. The crowd waited outside in the cool evening air, huddled in small groups, sharing snacks, checking phones, whispering hopes and fears. No one left. They all wanted to hear the decision in person. When the board returned, the president stood at the mic again. Her expression was serious, but there was something new in her eyes. Resolve, maybe, or relief. She read the findings slowly, clearly. After reviewing video evidence, internal communications, and multiple first-hand accounts, the board concluded that the teacher had engaged in repeated conduct that created a hostile and discriminatory learning environment, in violation of district policy and state education codes. Then came the sentence, immediate termination of employment, no severance, no recommendation letter, and a formal notice to the state licensing board recommending suspension of her teaching credentials pending further review. A quiet murmur ran through the crowd. Not celebration, this wasn't a victory party, but something deeper. Acknowledgement. Relief. The sense that for once the system had listened. The boy didn't cheer. He just exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. His mom squeezed his hand. They walked out together into the night, the streetlights casting long shadows behind them. News of the decision spread fast. By morning, it was on every local channel. National outlets picked it up too, not as a scandal but as a rare example of accountability in education. Experts called it a turning point. Activists called it long overdue. But for the people who lived it, it was simpler than that. It was justice. Not perfect, not complete, but real. The teacher filed an appeal a week later, claiming the decision was rushed and politically motivated. But without support from colleagues, without public sympathy, and with so much documented evidence against her, the appeal didn't stand a chance. Within a month, her teaching license was suspended indefinitely. She vanished from public view. No interviews, no social media posts, no further statements. Just silence. And in that silence, something new began to grow. At Jefferson High, students started talking more openly about fairness in the classroom. Teachers began attending workshops on implicit bias, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to do better. The principal announced a new student advisory group focused on inclusion, and applications poured in. The boy, he kept going to school, kept raising his hand, kept writing. And when a younger student shyly asked him how he found the courage to speak up, he just smiled and said, "I didn't do it alone, and neither do you," because that was the real lesson, not about one teacher losing her job, but about a whole community finding its voice. And once that happens, nothing stays the same.